And this here is the RTX 3080 Founders Edition in all of its glory. It's gonna look super weird when we slide this thing in here. Is it, oh God, is it even gonna fit? Oh, hold on. I was super excited when the Tech Fam asked me to join in on their $300 RTX 3080 PC build challenge. Not even sure we came up with an official name for this challenge. The idea is to build a $300 system and then throw in an RTX 3080 Founders Edition. That's pretty much the gist of it. So $300 for everything except the graphics card. We're all gonna use the exact same graphics card, so there's really no difference there. The difference though is going to be in how we allocate the $300 to build a system around that graphics card. So effectively, we're building a $1,000 PC with an RTX 3080 in it, which is pretty freaking difficult to do, if I'm being honest. By this point, you've probably seen our original ad for Thermal Grizzly's Carbonite pads. They're clean, peace of mind replacements for traditional thermal paste, and best of all, you'll never have to replace them. But did you also know that you can buy Carbonite pads in different sizes for various processors? They even make a giant 51x68mm pad for Threadripper. I highly recommend Carbonite pads, and you can learn more by clicking the link below. So to get started, these here are the rules. I'm only gonna show them on screen for a few seconds, so feel free to pause if you need. But in short, the idea is to spend the $300 on sites like eBay, OfferUp, Craigslist, wherever. These are gonna be secondhand parts, more than likely, for a budget of this caliber. You wanna maximize value and do that mostly in the used market. And I bought everything that you're seeing here on eBay and somehow managed to pull off an AMD Ryzen 7 system. That's right, 8 cores, 16 threads, and actually a pretty sweet B350 motherboard. 8 gigs of RAM, I made a compromise there. A 320 gig hard drive, there was no storage rule per se, we just had to be able to fit the benchmarks all onto one storage device. A 600 watt power supply, it's actually rated for 700 watts, but we'll see how that goes. And a pretty cheap Rosewill case. Yeah, that's basically everything, and I'll show you kind of briefly here the parts specifically that I bought on eBay. They total to almost exactly $300, so this was like just by the skin of my teeth. I was able to pull this off somehow. I made a lot of offers. I actually am filming this video quite late. The benchmarks are due in a few days. So we're gonna put this thing together and see how it performs. I'm hoping everything works, because if something doesn't work, I have literally no time to get a replacement, so crossing fingers. So I think the best thing I could have done with this budget was buy a Ryzen 7 CPU. I got this for around 120 bucks. And it came with the CPU itself, obviously, 1700X, and a stock cooler. This is a low profile cooler, so I imagine we're not gonna be able to do much overclocking with it, but it kept the cost down. I didn't have to buy an aftermarket cooler, and actually these are pretty decent considering. So we're gonna try to overclock this thing. I'm just not sure again how far it's gonna go, especially with the board of this caliber, although the fact that I was able to get a B350 motherboard in this price range over an A320, which would have been my last resort, pretty decent. Now the 8 gigs of RAM, I'm sure you guys are wondering why the heck I only went with 8 gigs of RAM, and the reason why is because I just simply had no more money. The good thing is though, for another 20 bucks or so, I think I got these for 22, 23 bucks, something like that. I could just add another 8 gigs and I'd have a full 16, which would be plenty for gaming. But for the games we'll be running, I actually think that 8 gigs will be enough. Sure, we're missing out a bit on performance, and yes, these DIMMs are the slowest you could get for DDR4, what, 2133 megahertz. That is going to hurt us quite a bit, especially seeing as though we found with the Ryzen platform. But I don't think many of my colleagues, my competitors in the Tech Fam have managed to pull off a Ryzen 7 CPU. Maybe Ryzen 5, but I'd be pretty surprised if they squeezed out Ryzen 7, or even thought that they could. A lot of them, I bet, went with Xeons. I might be totally wrong here, but I don't think this is going to hurt us as bad as some might expect, just because we're already on a great platform to begin with. So how about I give you a quick build montage? Here we go. Now, unfortunately, this motherboard does not come with the original box. I always like having that. It's good for storage, good to keep motherboard accessories in. It also can potentially help resale value, but the motherboard also does not come with the rear I/O shield, so it's gonna look a bit tacky. Obviously not gonna affect functionality at all though, and that's why I was okay. I mean, I think I got this thing for under 50 bucks, so not too bad. Motherboards don't really depreciate as much as you would expect some of them to. All right. right, looking good. Now I'm gonna try to cable manage a bit before we get the power supply in there, because that's gonna be basically right below the motherboard, and there aren't too many places to optimally route cables. So I'm gonna take care of front I/O, and then probably install the hard drive next. Then we'll do power supply, then the graphics card. Yeah, it's gonna be a pretty full system. I think it's actually gonna look pretty good. For only being around $300 all in, this ain't too bad. All right, and here is the right side of the case, minus the graphics card that has not been installed yet, but I've got cables routed where they should be, connected everywhere except for obviously the PCIe supplemental power cables. I actually think I did a pretty good job considering this case does not have much clearance behind the motherboard tray, and I did unfortunately have a bit of overlap. I had to stuff a few extra cables, excess SATA and Molex cables in front of the power supply. Not that it's gonna matter though, because this left side panel is completely closed off, so you won't be able to see inside, but just kind of a pet peeve. I try to stay true to that and hide as many cables as I can behind. Anyway, there's one semi-big problem, depending on how you look at it, with regards to the power supply and the graphics card. So this is a 700 watt unit, which in theory should be enough for an RTX 3080 and a Ryzen 7 1700X. Even if we overclock the CPU a bit, still should be plenty of wattage headroom, but there's a problem with the cabling. Yeah, so for some reason this power supply includes one 8-pin or 6+2 pin, and then one just plain old 6-pin. I'm not sure why they didn't just tack on the extra two ground cables. They kind of daisy, well, some of them daisy chain them, but it's really frustrating, and I don't have an adapter for this, so we're gonna try to see if we can just jump it with an 8 plus a 6, and then maybe like short the two grounds in the end. I'm not even sure if the card will post with just a 6-pin where an 8-pin should go. So we'll see. I honestly, I have no idea what's gonna happen. Now this case has these stupid fixed PCIe slot covers, and this here is the RTX 3080 Founders Edition in all of its glory. It's gonna look super weird when we slide this thing in here. Is it, oh God, is it even gonna fit? Oh, hold on. This has got to be one of the closest calls. Wow, that is meant to be, folks. Look how snug that is in there. Actually, might even have, well, you'd have to have really narrow 120 mil fans up front. Kind of defeat the purpose of the fans altogether. And all right, so I somehow managed to get the right side panel on, connected everything. Again, we do have that missing 2-pin, the 2 extra grounds here. We might have to do something about that, but we're gonna see if it posts as is. If we get a post, that's good. If we don't, I'm gonna assume it's the graphics card power first, and then if it's not that, after we address that issue, then we've got a serious problem. So let's go ahead and attempt to power it on. Yeah. So I'm pretty sure the graphics card's gonna need that extra 2 pins, which kind of blows, but I think I have an adapter, and I'll have to look at the rules, but I think the rules allow for adapters free of charge. All right, so I think I found a loophole. Am I bending the rules just a tad? Yeah, maybe, but it's the only way we're gonna be able to stay under budget, because everything else, the price of everything else that you saw just now, comes out to exactly 300 bucks, excluding the graphics card, of course. So what we're going to do, they made an exception here. It says cost of SATA cables, thermal paste, not counted in total, but the cost of specialty parts, including the 6 to 8-pin PCIe power adapter that we do need, needs to be counted. I looked up on eBay how much these cost, in the realm of $2 to $3. That's still not good. That'll dock like 10% of our total points, just for going $3 over budget. 1% over budget docks you 10%. So that's no good. So what I think we're gonna do, we're gonna take these SATA cables here, because these don't count in the total. I can just use wire from SATA cables to jump the 2 extra grounds, which is super sketchy, but it should allow the PC to post. Shouldn't throw any weird, weird issues with the card. I don't know, we'll find out. But yeah, I can just rip some wire from SATA cables and call it a day. So free wire. Yeah, I know I'm bending the rules, but you know what? I didn't write these, and I'm just interpreting them as I think anyone else would. So the pinout for a 6-pin like this, you'll see 3 black wires as are ground, and 3 yellow wires. Those are 12 volt lines. So the extra 2 pins that you would see in an 8-pin actually don't supply any additional power. They're just extra grounds. And a lot of times, especially with cheaper power supplies, you'll see those extra 2 grounds daisy chained into either 2 of the 3 grounds that are already in the 6-pin. So that's exactly what we're gonna do. All right, and there we go. Now it looks kind of janky, and I'm sure some will argue that, well, you should include the cost of electrical tape. Well, the amount of electrical tape I've used here is pretty much negligible, and I really didn't even need to wrap this stuff. I just did that just to be on the safe side because I don't want any of this stuff shorting out. But yeah, now we're gonna try powering it on. Let's hope that I have a proper connection, you know, between the pins, and yeah, we'll go from there. Graphics card is lit up this time. That's good stuff. That's good stuff. We're gonna get a post here. Oh yeah, come on. Come on. Everything looks good. It should post. Please post. Yes, yes, yes! All right, so we've installed Windows 10. We're gonna go ahead and update to the latest version. I'm not sure if that was stipulated in the rules. The versions tend to have at least a small impact on performance, but we're gonna just update to whatever the latest is, 2004 or something like that. We're gonna install all of the necessary drivers, all the necessary benchmarks. Problem with a hard drive, oh, it's been a while since I've used a hard drive as a boot drive, but I've been waiting for like 30 minutes just for disk allocation for a single game. And all right, so these here are our first 2 scores, and I guess I'll take this moment to talk about my overclocking experience with this particular B350 board. It did not go very well at all. Actually could not overclock at all, either the memory or the CPU. So we're stuck at a base 3.4 gigahertz on the 1700X and 2133 megahertz on the memory, which is garbage, especially for a Ryzen platform. But that's what I can work with in this budget, and I still think that we have one of the best CPUs of everyone we're going to be competing against. So I'll take these scores. So we got what, 3411, and then yeah, single core was what, 356, which is kind of meh. But again, I think that if a lot of the people we're competing against went with like older Xeons or older, like maybe like Haswell CPUs, I don't think anyone would have gone Bulldozer or Pile Driver. I think we'll at least match some of those IPCs, so I don't expect our single core score to be all that bad, frankly, seeing as though I'm not even mildly overclocked. And the next test on the list was 3D Mark Time Spy. We're just supposed to report this overall score here, which will weight both the CPU and GPU kind of independently and then merge them into this big number here. So 14,218, not too shabby. Now the next test to run is Shadow of the Tomb Raider. We got the 1080p highest preset enabled, and then they want ray trace shadows jacked up to ultra. And then we'll report the average FPS at the end of the benchmark screen. All right, and our average FPS was 86. This is the score that we will input into the Excel spreadsheet. Now you can see that we were only GPU bound 8% of the time, so I imagine this won't be the best score if someone else in the contest uses like a Ryzen 5 2600 or a Ryzen 3 3100 or 3300X. Like those CPUs I think are going to be better for a game like this, seeing as though they have stronger individual cores. You probably aren't going to use more than maybe 6 to 8 threads for a game like this. And our score in Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six Siege in the 1080p Ultra preset using the Vulkan API is 257. Again, not too bad. What are you doing? Up next was Blender. We were supposed to record times for both the BMW and Fishy Cat simulation. So 4 minutes and 9 seconds for BMW, 6 minutes and 8 seconds for Fishy Cat. We're going to combine both of these times. It's 10 minutes and 17 seconds. And then I convert this to just seconds and record this in the Excel, I almost said Expel, spreadsheet. All right, and our Final Fantasy 15 score is 9116. So it's a very high ranking. This is in 1080p, the highest preset, whatever the highest preset for the high quality, that's what they call it, high quality. And yeah, not too bad. I feel like in the games we're gonna struggle a bit more again because our 1700X is running at stock and we're using some pretty cheap, slow memory and only 8 gigs of it at that, you gotta remember. So that was the big compromise we made in order to get an 8-core CPU. Had I squeezed out 16 gigs of DDR4 that was a bit faster in the budget, I would have only been able to buy a Ryzen 5 chip, and I felt like that was a pretty obvious route. So I wanted to be a bit different. leverage core count a bit more because there are some just raw CPU synthetic tests here that are going to weigh very heavily on our total overall score. So we'll see how we do. I'm not going to peek at the others' scores yet because I want you guys to go and watch those videos. So they're actually going to be linked in a playlist in this video's description. You click on that, it'll show you all the videos from everyone who entered the contest, pretty much the entire tech fam, and then you get a good idea of how all of our builds stack up to each other. All I can say then is wow. It just goes to show you how resourceful one can be when the budget is very limited. I mean, 300 bucks, relatively speaking, is not much at all for a semi-modern gaming PC, but we managed to squeeze out an 8-core Ryzen 7 1700X system with an overclockable motherboard, a B350 chipset. Granted, we couldn't overclock. And yes, obviously, I made compromises. That was the point of this entire challenge. What were we willing to compromise to squeak out the most we could, performance-wise, out of both the GPU and CPU? The compromises for me personally were the RAM. I didn't think much of what we were doing, testing, was gonna rely on heavily 16 gigs or more of DDR4, and the storage drive, which really has no impact on performance, just load times. And let me tell you, I miss using an SSD for a boot drive. This hard drive is unbelievably slow. I know it says 7,200 RPM on the drive, but it feels like 720 RPM. The OS alone takes like 5 minutes to boot up. Now I'm excited to see what the others did in this $300 budget. So again, be sure to check out the playlist in the video description, see what they did, because I think that we were all gonna be a bit resourceful. I think it was inevitable, given that we had $300 and that didn't include a graphics card. We kind of branch out a bit more, maybe go the Intel route. You know, Haswell, maybe even Skylake gonna have pretty strong IPC in a $300 budget. But when it comes to multi-core things, it's gonna fall short, right? That's kind of the approach I took, was the opposite of that, where I'd rather have more cores that are just a bit slower. I assumed I was gonna be able to overclock a bit, and I thought at least the memory would overclock to maybe 2400, if I'm lucky, 2666 megahertz. None of that. Literally no overclocking at all. So if I win, I'm gonna be kind of surprised. I would be happy with the top 3. So if I get silver or bronze, that's good enough for me. We'll see how it goes. Be sure to check out those videos, and then we'll have a summary video by another channel. They're gonna kind of go through the ranks, reveal everyone's scores, talk about other things like aesthetics and the like. If you guys like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. I would appreciate that. Consider clicking that subscribe button, and stay tuned for more content on the channel. My name is Greg. Thanks for building with me.